Well, welcome to the 700 Club. What would you do if rockets were raining down on your cities? That's the big question former Israeli Ambassador Ron Dermer has for America. Why does he say the media is on the terrorist side? And how can Americans help the Jewish state? Our Chris Mitchell reports on the ground in Jerusalem.
In 1 week, Hamas and other terror groups have fired more than 3,000 rockets into Israel, putting up to 4 million Israelis in bomb shelters day or night. Ambassador Ron Dermer wonders how Americans would respond.
I would ask Americans who are watching this unfold in Israel, think about this. Our army is fighting this war and surgically going after the terrorists not thousands of miles away from our shores. It's right in our backyard when our own population is in bomb shelters. So imagine 150, 200 million Americans sitting in bomb shelters. What do you think they'd want their army to do in order to get at the terrorists who are firing rockets at them?
Many of Hamas's rockets have hit towns in south and central Israel, including its second largest city, Tel Aviv. Dermer blames Hamas for a double war crime.
They target our civilians by firing rockets indiscriminately into our population center, hoping to kill as many Israelis as possible. But the other thing they do is they embed their terrorist infrastructure in civilian areas. So they place their weapons next to schools, next to mosques, next to hospitals, and they even took over, military intelligence of Hamas took over a building where journalists are because they want to use these people as human shields. Well, these are legitimate military targets, and even though they're legitimate military targets, we will take the steps necessary to keep civilians out of harm's way.
Israel has taken out large towers inside Gaza City and large parts of Hamas's war machine, but with relatively few casualties in light of Israel's massive bombing campaign.
Because we warn them. We actually call people. We then fire a weapon that sort of knocks at the top of the building, telling people, get out of the building. We give them the time to leave, and then we take out the building.
The Associated Press is outraged over Israel destroying the building that housed its offices, even though Israel reportedly showed evidence to the U.S. that Hamas worked out of that building. Dermer says Hamas is manipulating the media.
Part of Hamas's strategy is to turn the media into enablers for what they're doing. How does it work? They will fire rockets at us. Then when we respond to that rocket fire in those civilian areas and unfortunately make a mistake or there's collateral damage, civilians die, then Hamas wants the entire world to blame Israel. The media should report on everything, but they should lay the blame squarely where it belongs, on Hamas. And if they understand Hamas, that the media will not enable them.
Dermer says Hamas's strategy is to confuse the situation.
They want to say both sides are at fault. Both sides are not at fault. On one side, you have a democracy called Israel that values human life, the lives of our own citizens, and also the lives of our enemy civilians, those who they are using as human shields. On the other side, you have a terror organization that glorifies death, that is trying to kill as many Israelis as possible and doesn't care about their own people. They actually will use them in their propaganda wars. And I don't think any moral equivalency should be made between the two.
During the current conflict, Dermer says U.S. evangelical support is vital.
I hope that Christians will make their voices heard now. I hope that they will call their representatives, tell them how important it is to stand with Israel. Because I can tell you something, Chris, and you've seen this around the world. Those people who are the opponents of Israel, they're in the streets. They're waving their flags. They're demonizing Israel. And it's important that the friends of Israel go out there and make clear that they stand with Israel.
According to Dermer, what lies ahead is a determined Israeli campaign to degrade Hamas's ability to wage war so that this conflict does not repeat itself anytime soon.
Chris Mitchell joins us now for more on the fighting. Chris, listen, in 2005, Prime Minister Ariel Sharon pulled Israeli settlers out and troops out of Gaza. The result has been catastrophic. Don't you think they knew this would happen?
Well, Pat, we were there in 2005 when the disengagement happened, and there were people warning. They were actually saying the people inside, we are the finger in the dike. Don't take us out, because what's going to happen is terror is going to flood in. Just a little history lesson. There were 21 Jewish communities there, 9,000 people inside Gaza. They employed many Palestinians. Now, before 2005, there were some mortars inside Gaza, But after 2005 and the disengagement, it changed dramatically. After the disengagement, thousands of rockets near Gaza were like in places like Sderot. But beyond that, it just continued. There were 3 conflicts, 2008, 9, 2012, 2014, each one greater than the last. The number of rockets increased, their range increased. And so now we're watching, instead of what was small terror attacks inside Gaza to these 9,000 people, we're watching Tel Aviv get hit regularly. And right now, Pat, we're watching the largest average rocket barrage in Israel's history, about 460 average a day, many more than what we are up on the Second Lebanon War, Pat. There were 4,034 days today. There's almost 3,000, more than 3,000 in 8 days. Many of these rockets supplied by Iran. And right now we have a foothold for Iran on Israel's southern border. So the disengagement, as you said, it's really been a bitter and a tragic lesson for Israelis. From 9,000 back in 2005, now we have 4 million Israelis in and out of bomb shelters on a regular basis.
Chris, tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I understand the Biden administration has resumed giving money to the Palestinian Authority, which in turn is controlled by Hamas, and they are in turn buying weapons from Iran, which are being used to bomb Tel Aviv. Now, am I correct in any of those things?
Well, I was slightly just adjusted just a bit, Pat. They are giving money to the Palestinian Authority, which actually, in many, the view of many, is emboldening the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. What's happening in Hamas is actually threatening the rule of Palestinian Authority inside the West Bank. What we're seeing in Iran right now is that Iran is supplying, funding these missiles. Just last week, there was a Palestinian Islamic Jihad spokesman that was boasting that Iran was supplying these missiles. They're not only supplying these missiles, but they're giving them technology to build these missiles. So now Hamas can manufacture their own missiles. That's exactly what Israel's trying to do now, is degrade the ability of Hamas to manufacture these weapons and shoot them indiscriminately into Israel.
Chris, do you think there's any possibility of the IDF going on a ground war to just clean that Gaza Strip out?
Well, Pat, you know, in normal circumstances, you would think that was exactly what Israel should do. For Israel, it's a last resort because they don't want to put all of their soldiers in harm's way. It's probably going to be, they estimate, 100, 200 soldiers. That's what happened in 2014. It's very difficult fighting. It's urban warfare when they go in there. And one thing they don't want to do, Pat, is really take over Gaza completely, because then they don't know exactly who's going to take over after that. So I think it's a last resort. It's still possible. They do have thousands of reservists on the border right now, tanks, artillery. They're ready to go in if they have to, but I would think, Pat, it would be a last resort. Great.
Chris, thank you for, again, inspired reporting. Well, in other news, mask or no mask? The CDC has given the green light to drop wearing masks for everyone who's been vaccinated. And so why are some businesses still saying you have to wear a mask? John Jessup has more on that.
That is right, Pat. Starbucks is the latest national business to go maskless. The company joining Costco, Walmart, Publix, and Trader Joe's in giving vaccinated customers the go-ahead to drop the mask, so long as state and local governments don't require one. However, other businesses like Home Depot leaving mask restrictions in place for now. Some blame confusion from the CDC. Over the weekend, the director saying the new guidance doesn't mean there should be widespread mask removal until state and local governments work out their policies. Others concerned that there's no way to verify who's been vaccinated.
Many businesses are worried because, you know, there's no way to really confirm who indeed is vaccinated and who is following the CDC guidelines as they should be.
In Oregon, there's a move to require businesses to confirm vaccinations before allowing customers to go without masks. Nationwide, at least 9 states already banning what are being called vaccine passports. Well, the Colonial, Pat, back to you.
Well, before we leave the mask thing, there's a story out that's so important about this Institute of Virology in Wuhan. And we're trying to determine, and hopefully I can have something on for tomorrow, about how implicit Dr. Fauci was in the whole enhancing the coronavirus that has killed millions of people around the world. It's a shocking story, and hopefully we can get more on it for you tomorrow. John?
Sure, Pat. Sorry for stepping on you earlier. Well, the Colonial Pipeline is wide open, and millions of gallons of gas are flowing to the East Coast again. While shortages are easing, there are still some dry spots, including right here in Washington, the nation's capital, where 80% of stations still face shortages over the weekend. One woman stranded for days.
So how long have you been stuck here?
Since Friday night.
Friday night, you haven't been able to move your car at all. And you haven't been able to get gas for the car.
Right.
Experts say panic buying contributed to the fuel shortages. Colonial says it could take up to 2 weeks for some areas to get back to normal. In the meantime, analysts say, Pat, if you don't need gas, try to hold off on topping off those tanks.
You know, it's an amazing thing. The Biden administration has said, well, it looks like the hacker who did that is located in Russia. Russia, not China, Russia. And it was a devastating hack at our infrastructure. But the amazing thing is to think that Putin let somebody in his domain run a hack of that magnitude without his knowledge is just nonsense. We don't think the Russians were implicated. Well, yes, they were. And this is just a warm-up. But I have been warning forever and ever and ever about the danger to our infrastructure, not only to the fuel supply, but our total electrical grid is, if there's some kind of a corona explosion coming out of the sun, that would devastate us. A low-yield nuclear explosion over Chicago would literally shut down the entire nation. You see what happened with one pipeline. And interestingly enough, you know, guess what Biden did on the first day of office? He shut down the Keystone pipeline. We've got to have pipelines, and we have to be able to give fossil fuel. People need gas, and they operate. This country is so dependent on it. And there's no way in anybody's imagination that we could be able to have enough renewables, you know, of wind and solar and all that stuff to accommodate the need of our nation. But I'm telling you, if we don't spend some money to harden our grid and to harden these, you know, they talk about infrastructure. We all want to see infrastructure. But we don't want to call infrastructure teachers' salaries and child care and things like that. What is infrastructure? I think the Republicans and the Democrats can get together on an honest infrastructure bill, but we are earnestly hoping that the alarm has been sent because of this Colonial Pipeline, that the major infrastructure, the roads and the bridges and the electrical grid and these other things have got to be hardened, and it needs to be done immediately. It will cost so little now, and it will cost such a tragic amount if our nation will be crippled unless somebody does something about it. John?
Well, Pat, from the East Coast now to the West Coast, about 1,000 residents in Southern California are under evacuation orders today as a brush fire grows rapidly. The Palisades fire nearly doubling to 13,025 acres Sunday, where flames are feeding on dry mountain brush. The Topanga Canyon is about 20 miles west of downtown Los Angeles. California expecting another rough wildfire season. Right now, 1/3 of the state is experiencing drought conditions. One expert, Pat, predicting the western U.S. could see the worst drought in almost 2 decades.
Well, again, we pray for our friends in California. And I don't know whether you attribute this to bad management or whatever it is, but it is a tragedy.